All right. All right. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. We're going to have people get logged in. We had some people who sent some questions in advance. All right. We'll get started here. I'm going to turn down my monitoring PC. If everyone wants to do a quick introduction, if you're watching this live, if you want to just tell us, I see some people already that are logged in. If you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself and tell us where you're from. My name is Greg Ondo. I'm presenting from Northern Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. area in the United States. I'll be the host for the Hangout today, but if you have any questions, please feel free to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from, as well as if you have comments and or questions that you want covered in today's Hangout. We got a number of questions kind of sent in advance. You can put those in the info line. If you're watching this not live, you don't have to introduce yourself. You can. Also, we've had some people that are incredibly generous and will do an index of the topics that we cover in the meeting. So if anyone wants to kind of keep almost like meeting notes, that they could enter in the comments field so people could jump to very specific areas within the program, within the Hangout for specific topics. That's always super helpful. So let everyone get logged in. We're going to have people logging in from around the world, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. If you're watching it offline, you may want to fast forward to 5 or 10 minutes by the time we collect some questions and get everything started here. So we'll go ahead and get some people get logged in. All right, so we have St. Louis. Good to see you, Taylor, from Pine Grove. We have Neil from Greencastle, Pennsylvania. We have St. Louis, Missouri. Good to see you, Greg, from Portland, Oregon. All right, we have Holland. Kaliningrad, Russia. I probably said that totally wrong. I apologize for my mispronunciation. All right, we have Riverside, California. Moscow. We have someone from Geneva, CH. I'm not sure if that's Chile or China. All right, we have Mark from Chicago. I'll be passing through Chicago later this week. All right, we have Dave from New Jersey. All right, so we also have Mervin from New Jersey has a question about Talkback Mic, so we'll talk about that. All right, we have Glenn from Suffolk, Virginia. Done a lot of studio work there years ago. All right, we have Mac from Twin Cities. Good to see you online. All right, we have Rob, who's transitioning from digital performer. Just got a CC 121. That's a great little controller. All right, we have Switzerland, Latvia. CH is Switzerland. Sorry for my ignorance. Thanks for teaching me. All right, Vinny from Orlando. Glad you could join us. All right, so we have LA, Bulgaria. We have another from Glarus. I probably said that wrong. Switzerland. So we have Poland, Dusseldorf, Boston, Austria, India, Johannesburg, Tampa. We have New York City. We have Ghana, Bosnia, Dublin, Angola. We have Belgium, Berkeley, California. All right, we have Stanley from Poolsville. Good to see you online again. And once again, if you have questions, please feel free to kind of enter them in the comments field so we can start collecting those. We also have Belgium. So once again, if you're just kind of joining us, please feel free to introduce yourself. Tell us where you're from. I think we have 4 continents represented. I'm not sure if we've had anyone from Antarctica live, but I think we've had all the other continents live in the past. Right, so we have Ossining, New York. So I had to see a question kind of came up about any tips on CPU spikes with Contact. I've heard, I don't use Contact regularly. I'm more of a Hallion guy, but I know some people, you know, will obviously do a lot of different. I've heard that there's a lot of problems with tempo changes that causes a lot of problems within Contact that could be related more to Contact than anything else. So, you know, there's probably a lot of freezing and render in place functionality that you could explore with that. And, you know, sometimes, you know, as you load up a large instrument in Contact, it could take a lot of CPU cycles to play. So I know in Hallion, there was a function where, you know, if you only used 8 samples of, you know, 400 that were loaded up, that you could unload the unused samples. So there's probably some equivalent in Contact that could definitely help with performance. All right, so Nick, good to see you online. I believe he's in New Jersey. All right, we have Istanbul. So my mother's been there twice on holiday. She loved Turkey. All right, we have India. All right, we'll get started here in just a minute. All right, just jotting down one more question and we'll get started. All right, so we have Sacramento, Germany. We have Rick Tell from Nashville. All right, and we had a suggestion and a comment about increasing the preload memory and contact for better performance. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So we had a question come in right before the Hangout started about being able to have how to change multiple tracks to follow the chord track. So if we have a sequence here, so let's say I have just a little Brandenburg concerto action here from Bach. So if I wanted to select multiple channels, you can go to the Chords tab here, and I could change them all to off simultaneously, just holding down a shift key. Or if I wanted to select multiple tracks, let's say everything but drums, I could just select probably everything here and just say chords and scales. And then at this point, we could just say follow directly. And as soon as we enter this in, now as we would change the particular chord progressions here, so let's say we're in G major. And if I wanted to make that minor, I could just simply come right here. And now we could see what it would sound like without having to change every single B natural to B flat. Or if I wanted to modulate here, let's say I just wanted to go down to maybe E and I wanted to switch between to E minor chords here. I could just simply come here and let's say I want that to be, let's say, major for that. So at this point you could and as I make these changes, all of these, you'll see all the MIDI parts here just changed. So if I wanted this to be an A minor, at this point I could, and as I do this, we'll see like all the MIDI notes here change to reflect those changes here. So to get multiple tracks to switch to follow the chord track, which is kind of the original question, just select all the parts, go into the chords from the inspector, and under follow chord track, you can set to chords and scales, or just to chords, or just to the scales or root notes. Root notes may want to do for bass, but that's how you could do it. We also, since we're kind of have the chord track open, we also had a question. It's kind of stemming from two questions based on chord track from Taylor, who's on the Hangout from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. Family grew up near there. Beautiful part of the country. So, but if you wanted to just kind of, and he had asked a question, he sent me a video, and I couldn't really replicate what was going on in the video on my systems. I tried it on 3 different computers. And as he would do something, that the chord definition box would kind of get in the way. So one other way that I found to kind of keep it here, Taylor, is if you have the chord track definition, if you just hit, if you have one selected and you just hit the left, right arrow keys, that it will stay directly in the particular, in the same area. If you double click, it'll go directly centered below the selection where you start, and you hit the left and right arrows on your computer keyboard to just simply define the chords like so. So I'm not sure what is different, and I tried to see if there's anything where you click to change the position of the chord track, but I couldn't really get it to not stick to that particular area. And if you want to email me, I'd be happy to kind of remotely take a look at your system to see if there's something up. But if you just select one particular chord, and at this point use the left and right arrow keys, it should stick in the original like origin of what chord you opened it in from, without kind of covering over a lot of different parts. So give that a try with the arrow keys and see if that helps and makes sense. Now, also relating to the chord tracks, when we wanted to come directly here, let's say if we have a new project, and this kind of stems from a discussion we had last month on a Hangout about that the chord track doesn't do power chords, kind of often used with guitars, where it's just a root, fifth, and an octave. So technically it's not a chord, because a chord needs 3 distinct tones. So if there was a way of, you know, and we talked about a logical editor preset to take out the thirds within a chords, and Taylor had written back that when he was entering the chords, that, you know, the voicings sometimes weren't just simple block chords. So let's say if I come here, I have an E chord, and I come here, let's add an A chord, and let's do a B. We'll do most boring chord progression in history. All right. And I'll just load up a quick instrument here. So let's just say I wanted this to be outputted, and I'll just search for a quick instrument patch here. So I'll have piano. So if I wanted to, and what you could actually do is kind of just set your chord voicings here. So if you select the chord track, the default chord voicing that you'll notice will be piano. And you could kind of see that you'll have like the octave, like an E1, E2, G sharp 2, B2. So if we deleted the middle note, we could delete kind of the tonic of the chord, but at an octave higher. But if we switch this to basic, at that point, we could just say, here's our voicing in root position. And as we adjust that down, we would have just kind of a basic chord progression as we look at our different parts here. So if I just wanted to now just switch that particular chord voicing to basic, when you go to look at your particular parts, you could have, you could try out and just see. I think that will do the trick for you for just having the basic block chords where you could take out the third very easily. So again, just kind of come here. And if you go to the very first chord, you could see different voicing options. And if you come here to guitar, you'll have different voicing options for guitar that are unique from typical voicing options on piano, which are different than your basic chords as well. So try experimenting with a basic chord voicing, and I think that should kind of do the trick for you. Another question we had was there a change? I think it was from like 9.51 to 9.52 where certain video files weren't loading up for Taylor. So when you go to import different video files, video files could be a bit different. So when you go to do a particular video, often what's going to happen is, it's unlike a standard WAV file that will play back in every program that will play back a WAV file. Video files can be very dependent upon the, what's called a codec, and that's a converter, deconverter. So, there's a very specific codecs that are used within applications. If you go to the Steinberg website, it should, it'll kind of tell you exactly which codecs are supported, and supports all the major codecs. So as you're kind of working with that, so make sure, I don't think there's any changes in the particular from 951. There's a new video engine that was introduced in 903 last summer, about a year ago, maybe 11 months ago, and there was some changes there because that was kind of reliant upon QuickTime. But between 951 and 952 could be that, the videos that you tried importing since then are on different codecs. So, check if you go to, just check kind of the video codec list, and there's a number of shareware programs that you could change the codec from one to another. So you may want to look into some of those suggestions as well. All right, so just reading through a couple comments and some of our notes. Okay, so we had a question about color management. So let's go ahead and take a quick look with this. So I'll just go ahead and let me just add, let's say, a number of tracks here. All right, so we have kind of 16 default colors, and these colors are going to be based upon the project. So you could have different colors for different projects. And often, if people want to have a set number of colors that will always be carried over to other projects, simply save it within your template. So if you start off with a template, your template could have, you know, however many colors that you want. Now, so if you wanted to add additional colors, you could just come directly here and append colors. So you have kind of a color wheel that you could select. So if you want to make, I'm horrible with colors. I know people spend, you know, days working on it. So you could just kind of come here and then choose your various colors that you want. Let's say I want more of a blue, and you have your color wheel, like so. Hit OK. And let's say we'll make this more greenish. And you could adjust the saturation. So let's say I have these colors, and we could call them whatever we want as well. Okay, so now when we open up our color palette, we can see these additional colors. So I'm just going to reread the question, make sure I understand it. All right. So, you know, there's a couple of things. So the question was, you know, it could be when you have all these colors, a way to kind of manage the colors effectively, you know. So there's a couple preferences that can speed up this workflow. So one is, you know, a lot of people miss this, and I missed it for a long time. If I wanted to colorize a number of tracks, I could select the tracks and then set the color like so. And there's some other preferences if we come directly here. And let me just go to sometimes these change. Let's try on. Okay, so you could also have a default track color. So let's say every time, you know, so if you go under event display to tracks, there is some preferences for auto track color mode. So you could use a default track color, previous track color, or do a +1. So let's say if I come here and I added let's say an audio track here, and I've chosen to colorize the particular color such as that. And let's say if I wanted to now add 3 audio tracks or 4 audio tracks, as I add them, they will be incrementally added right here. So, you know, there are some preferences. Probably if you have, I could understand the desire if you have created like 100 different colors that you may want to, you know, put them into folders, you know. I could see, you know, a desire for that, or some things that people want to be put into folders, and I could pass that on if that's something that you wanted to. But be aware that, you know, if you start off with a template, you could have all of your colors, and there are preferences, and you may know this, but a lot of people miss this particular preference of going into event display and tracks and different coloring preference modes for as you add new tracks. So, and if you find that, you know, you go to another project and none of your colors, let's say if I go now to a new project, that those colors will be associated directly with the it looks like they're sticking there. But you could also kind of, you know, so I've seen people that couldn't get those transferred over from other computers, like when they update versions. So you may want to, I've known people to transfer those within a project file and use that as the template. So there's some suggestions that you can give a try. If you have any particular aspects that you want to be changed, feel free to just leave it in a comments field. Okay, so we have a question. Let's say placing a sampler track. Let's say I'll just add a number of audio tracks and some MIDI tracks. Okay, so someone asked about a way to add the sampler track directly below a selected track. So a lot of people may come here to their particular loops or just different sound effects. And when they come here, they could right click and create sampler track, and it adds it way at the very, very bottom, and you can have your sampler track, but that may not be organizationally where you want it. So really all you have to do, it's pretty simple, is just to add a sampler track here. And we could add one sampler track, and now you could just drag and drop any audio directly, and that's placed exactly where you want. So, I know it's not necessarily, add, directly below that, but if you just simply come here and add a particular sample track, if you want it to be right after this particular track, just add a sampler track, and you can make a macro to do that as well. And now you're but if you right click, it'll add it at the bottom. But just adding a particular sample track by right clicking here and adding sampler track, and there's obviously keyboard shortcuts and macros that could make that even faster if you wanted to. Excuse me, I have my laptop battery is going to die on my machine. Give me 1 second. All right. Sorry for the disruption there. So, and I see with the question that you didn't want to necessarily have the lower zone of, to have the lower zone. You might be open to do that. So let's see if maybe we can make a project logical editor. You might be able to make a project logical editor preset to move the lowest track up. I'm not sure if we could do this, but let me just see. May not be able to do it. So I think you may need to have the lower zone. Let me just see if I can. do this without the lower zone open. So close the lower zone, and let's just, so it's automatically gonna place it at the bottom and open that up. You can see if there's some clever project logical editor thing we could do. I may not be able to do it. Yeah, so I don't know of a way to automatically have that part appear directly, without having the lower zone open and dragging. But let me just see if there's perhaps a key command for under a sampler track. And let me just take another quick look at the project logical editor to see if there's perhaps a way. Yeah, I don't know. I don't see a clever project logical editor kind of move the track up. So I think, unfortunately, I think your best bet would have to be to create your sampler track and drag it in. But I'll definitely kind of add that to my notes to pass along as a workflow enhancement. Sorry about that. All right. So we had a quick question about shifting the pitch of an audio event over time. So let's just say I'll just drag an audio file out here. So let's say we'll do 2 bars. Okay, so you said 2 octaves across 8 bars. So I'll just kind of come here. I'll grab the range selection tool and I'll hit F7 to open up, where you could actually just come here, right click on the selection and go to processes. And then there's one called pitch shift. And if we come here, so we could do 16 semitones here if you wanted to. So when I come here now, I could just say we'll go ahead and process. So this has been processed. So if I wanted to listen to the original file, I'll just go ahead and bypass this and we'll listen. So let's say we have that, and then we'll go ahead and select the range here for 4 bars. And now what I could do is just simply and what's kind of cool about having the offline processes is you could just simply come over here and at any time within the project, or even after saved, you can just kind of turn it off like so. So you'll have kind of the original file you can bypass and it stores the original file. And again, if I wanted to process that pitch, so you can do, and we have this being used for a lot of game sound design type of functions as well. So that's a quick way of allowing you to do kind of offline pitch processing of your audio, just like that. Okay, so we had a question about someone opening a project and the send enable disable doesn't work when they first open the project. So let me just go ahead and go to a particular project. So I'll just come here where I now have a send for the reverb. And we'll see if we could recreate that. Okay, so I go to my vocal here and I have my send turned on. So seems to be kind of working as expected for me. If I'm misunderstanding the question, please feel free to jot back in the comments, and then but it seems to be working as expected. But once again, if I'm misunderstanding the question or if I'm doing something different, just let me know in the comments. But it seems to be kind of functioning as I would expect. All right. So we have a question from Nick about, having chords that he played in being accurately interpreted by the, by the chord track. So there's a couple different ways. I found it to be pretty accurate, but sometimes it could have different naming conventions than what some people may be used to. So, so if I wanted to come here, let's say I want to take this piano part and I'll go to my chord track here. And then I'll say create chord symbols. Now what it's going to do is actually create a chord track for me. I'll just turn this off really quick. But once you're in the chord definition area, you could also just click on MIDI input. So even if I just kind of I'll play just some total random notes, it'll just kind of, figure out kind of what I played. Just from my MIDI input here. So that's something that you could also do. So I'm not sure if it's Nick, if your question is regarding chords being interpreted here, from a part, and sometimes depending upon the rhythm that something was, entered in, if it's arpeggiating, there could be some interpretive issues, but I think generally it's done a really great job. But you could also just click here on the MIDI input for if you feel it didn't get the chord right. And so you could just say, okay, I want this to be an E minor, with a sharp 7, or, just an E minor 7th chord that I play. So you could just kind of come here and play different chords here. Just make sure that the MIDI input is turned on. So, So, but there could be different spellings for chords as well. So just be cognizant of that. Sorry, just scroll down a little too far. I'm just finding my way back to where we were questions wise. Thanks everyone for the great questions. All right, so I got a question. Is it possible to kind of take multiple tracks mixed into a single track? So let me just open up a project. So let's say I want to do like a quick mix down of drums. I think we'll have some in this project. All right. So if I just kind of come here, we can. So let's say, and the question was, you wanted to apply different effects together, kind of like crosstalk. So let's say in this, if I have, I'll just add, go to my mix console, and I'll come here, and I just wanted to add a reverb here to my drums. Okay, so let's say I'll just come over here, select all my drum parts. All right. Just going to move this up here, get out of the way so I don't send reverb to my reverb. Okay, so now I want to activate quick link, and we'll hold down, we'll add our revelation, we'll turn it all on. Okay, so now just bypass my quick link and we'll just add too much reverb here for our drums. So if you wanted to like quickly add, so let's say you've done, you know, if these are all being sent to a particular group, this could be quite easy. So let's say if I come here and I wanted to take these particular settings here, I'm going to, let's say, add a group channel. So I'm going to add a group channel to the selected channels here, and we'll just call it our drum bus. So these will all be outputted to my drum bus, and you could, you know, route the reverb out to your drum bus. And I spelled it incorrectly. So now if I wanted to, I could come to my export audio mixdown, and I could have my drum bus, if that's spelled bus, I could export that directly into the project. So if I just wanted to come here and I'll just do a quick, I won't do the whole song. We'll just do between the left and right locators here. So if we say export audio mix down, we can say, okay, we're going to export our drum bus and we could apply it to our audio track. All right, so now we hit OK. And now we could have all of everything just kind of mixed together with all bad reverb. Or another way of doing this is just to add another audio track. And now that it's been sent to a bus, we could add a stereo track. And as we do this, we want to set its input from our drum bus here. And then as I hit record, so that has now been bussed out directly there as well. So those are two different ways that you can get audio out if you wanted to. Now just have all of your drum tracks with the reverb bussed together as within a stereo track. You know, that's an easy way, and you could incorporate it. So you can do it offline or real time, however you want. So I think that will do the trick for you. If not, just leave a comment in the comments field. So we had a question. Is this an open hang to ask questions? Yep. You could just ask questions in the comments field. So. All right, so Nick had a question about like being able to find presets very easily with Media Bay. So a lot of times Media Bay stuff can, as soon as I go to, like, let's say if I wanted to add a MIDI track, I could come over here, hit browse. At this point, we could just say, okay, I wanted to, you know, let's say browse. Let's say I'll just add an instrument track. So if I just, let's say, add an instrument track, and now I wanted to come over here to, let's say, Pad Shop. If I click on browse, I could see kind of all of my Pad Shop stuff. I can see kind of all of my different instruments, but I could now just simply come over here to Pad Shop and I could see, you know, different types of presets just laid out for me, everything categorized. I have seen sometimes, you know, there are a couple preferences with Media Bay that could affect if you don't see it like being super fast as you would want. So let's say if I just wanted to come here and say, okay, I just wanted to go to Retrolog. So, but that seems pretty acceptable to me. So if I come here to my Retrolog library, I could scroll through all my different presets. But there are a couple of preferences to be cognizant of. So let's go to your preferences and under Media Bay. You know, you could, choose to scan folders only when media bay is open. You may want to just kind of turn that off. So, and the maximum number of results, I know some people set that to 100,000. That could cause it to be a little slow, but make sure you don't have the scan folders only when media bay is open, because that way it's going to kind of rescan the folders when that window appears. So make sure that is turned off. So, but it seems like my Mac isn't particularly fast, but it seems, pretty usable to me. But if yours is slower, check out some of those preferences, Nick, and see if they do the trick for you. So I had a question, a project open, a project created in 9.5, opening it in version 8. Some things, from earlier versions within the program may not carry over. So if you used a, feature that was in 9.5 that's not in 8, it's hard for the program to replicate that and to open it. So, they try as best they can. So, if you have just like a particular MIDI file or, a couple of audio tracks, some of those things can carry over. So depending upon the project and what functionality it's using, it may not be able to be opened. You could export it as an OMF file or make stems if you want to. But it's hard to go back and, as the program has evolved, to make new functions in the program carry over to the older programs. And it could be something even like, depending on in your studio setup. I haven't tried it yet, but it could be if you have 64-bit processing precision saved within the project, that might be carried over. So there's a lot of little things like that can have a pretty significant impact, whether an older version would be able to be opened up. All right, so we had a question about when using the UA the UA Twin Duo, that there's a significant delay when using virtual instruments. So generally, whenever I get this question, it could be, there's a little function here, and in version 9.5 and 9, I think it was kind of moved down here to constrain delay compensation. In 8.5 and earlier, it's up in this upper left-hand corner handle. So, but make sure that try just toggling that, and that often fix it. Like I just got a call from a kind of a famous producer in Miami who, works with Lady Gaga and a bunch of other great Latin artists. And he's called me in a panic. He's like, "Oh, all my MIDI's like so out of time. What's going on? What's going on?" I'm like, "Oh, just hit this button." He's like, "Oh, everything's fixed." So whenever you have kind of, and this is, Cubase has to do a lot of stuff behind the scenes to make all the delay compensation work. So just try toggling this constrained delay compensation button. And I think that might, that will probably do the trick for you. All right, so we had a question about the Talkback mic in the studio. So if you come here, for those of you that haven't used the Talkback mic in the control room, we could actually get this set up where we're going to use your audio interface. At this point, when we go to our VST connections in prior versions to 9.5, or our VST connections, there's VST connections or audio connections. So, but when we come here, you can route a talkback microphone. So the intention of the talkback mic is to allow you to communicate from the control room to various people with various people that are in the headphone mixes. So when we come here, you want to connect this to an input on your audio interface. On my MR816, for instance, I have it going into a mic pre that has a SPDIF output. And then that's connected. Now, when you go to the control room itself, you have to make sure, A, that the talkback is turned on. And you could have a keyboard shortcut that toggles that on or off. But when you go to the different cue mixes, for each of the cue mixes, make sure that talkback is turned on here. So if this isn't turned on or the talkback isn't engaged for each of the musicians, at that point, they won't be able to hear you. Now, there's a couple of preferences to be cognizant of and to be aware of. So when going into the control room, you could also just have you could also dim the cue like during your talkback. So, but I don't think that would, and also there's a disable mode. So while in record that you can't talk back, or in play and record, or no auto disable. So make sure that, check this preference, because that could turn it on or off. Make sure that it is connected properly in your audio connections under control room, and that each of the cue mixes here has the talkback enabled. So those are a couple of things that can make sure that the talkback mic isn't being heard within your system. So give those 3 or 4 suggestions a try and see how they work out for you. Okay, so we had a question when saving a template. When saving a template project to a new folder that's still pointing to the old folder. So when you're building a template, the one thing that a lot of people miss is that, let's say if we took this particular project and we wanted to build a template to kind of start off, what a lot of people do is they just select all of the files and then hit delete and save as a template. But the project itself still has the reference to the audio files here. So if we did this at that point, you could start a new project. So let's say if I save this as a template at this point, so we'll call this May 29th Hangout. And I'll hit OK. So as soon as we do that, at this point, when I go to start a new project, so let's say I choose a new folder, and hit open, all of my media would still, if I go to my pool window, it could be that your files will be stored there. Now, what you could do is when you go to your new project, I always have prompt for project location. So at this point, you could just say, let's create empty, and this will place you into the new folder. So I was recently, just last week, I was in Nashville and I was doing some work with Chuck Ainlay, and he had kind of a similar situation. So let's just say he had, and he wanted to basically almost save like an existing project as a template. So let's say if we come here, so I made a macro for him. And we'll show the macro. I think I still may have it on this. So the macro I made was build an empty project from existing one. So if you had the drums all dialed in and everything, so what we did it is just make a macro to select all, to delete, and we could delete all the automation in the project, remove the unused media, and then we had to save as and save as template. So if I ran this macro on this particular project here, so let's say we have a number of drums and guitars, bass, kind of like a live band scenario, I can now just execute this particular macro. And a lot of times I like to just save it as an empty project without any of the media. And now we could just say, here's our template. And now when I do a new project, I could just go to my templates here, define my new project folder, and then we're activated. And then at this point, you're good to go without any of the media, and everything could be kind of saved. Now, I saved an empty project because it could be that perhaps the drummer's like, oh, I love the drum sound you got on this session. Can you actually pull up that particular that drums from the session from 2 years ago? So if you come here, you can say, I want to import tracks from project. And if we come here, let's say to our Amos Moses empty, I could now just choose to import all the tracks without the media. And you could just put them into new tracks, or you could actually just assign them to particular tracks and replace the data on that particular track. So if you want to be able to easily kind of work with different templates, there's some easy ways of doing that. So you get started really quickly. But, and the one thing to always be kind of aware of is when you do a new project and you're at the hub, I always prompt for a particular file location. I see so many people just use the default location and they don't know where this is and they don't define it and they're kind of on autopilot. But if you just do a prompt for project location, you define that particular folder, and that way you can keep all of your files organized very easily. So I'm seeing just a comment from the last Hangout about previewing MIDI loops with Groove Agent 4. So I'm not sure if I remember seeing the email. So if you want to resend that to clubcubase at steinberg.net, I'd be happy to kind of take a look at it again. Sorry if I missed it. Okay, so we have a question. When creating the group channel, Why do I hear multiple audio signals rather than just a group channel? You know, when you do that, make sure that the group channel is soloed. So let's say if I just want it to, so let's say I'll just, so let's say I have a number of drums in this particular project. And I think I may have these routed to a drum group already. Excuse me. So let's say when I come here, this is our drum group. So all of our drums are being sent here. So if I solo my drums, I'm hearing only, if I solo the drum group, I'm hearing only the sources that are feeding into the drum group. And if I wanted to see that, at this point, I could see that we have, you know, all these different tracks that are feeding into the drum group, and the drum group is now going out of the stereo output. I got no control, hit the road. So if I come here, now I'm only hearing the drums. And not the other sources. But now I could kind of treat the drums as one collective entity volume-wise. But just routing it into a group, you're still going to hear the other sources until the group is soloed. So if I misunderstood a question, please just kind of add a comment in the comments field, but and let me know if I'm misunderstanding. So. All right, so we had a question, why use a VCA fader versus like a group fader? So let's take a look at that. Okay, so let's say so let's say I have a number of different drum tracks here. And yeah, the question comes up, there's different ways of linking, and the different methods of linking could really depend upon your current situation and what, you know, there's advantages and disadvantages to working with a group versus a VCA. So if I assign all these tracks, let's say to a drum group, at that point I could adjust the volume of the drum group, and it would, you know, bring all the different channel sources down. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll adjust my drums here. I'll just add all my drum tracks, and we'll right click and we'll add a group channel to the selected channels. Okay, so we're going to just have our group folder here. So now when I bring this down, all my drums are going down. So I could control the volume level of all my drums. And this is summing the audio source itself. So if I wanted to come here and apply an EQ to all my drums, I could EQ it as one collective entity. Now, where it gets tricky is, let's say if I go to my snare, so I'm going to come here to my snare track, and let's say I have this going out to a reverb. And let me just make it a really obnoxious big reverb here. Okay, so as soon as I have my group channel, so we go to my group channel here for we still hear it doesn't affect the gain structure of my aux sends. So I bring this down, it could affect, depending on if your send is pre-fader or post-fader, it could affect the gain structure of what you've set up. So I'm gonna come over here and we'll just undo a couple of things. So we'll just, and now, let's say let me just set this up. And what I want to do, and where VCAs come in really handy, is they're not going to affect the gain structure going to like auxiliary send. So when I come, I'll just revert this project really quickly. And what I want to do now is, we may notice that in particular tracks that we're going to have automation going on. So if you have a lot of automation already in your project, let's say where our faders are going up and going down. So what I want to do is to assign these to my VCA. To the selected channels. And now that what this is going to do is I could adjust my VCA. And as I adjust my VCA fader down, I could write this automation, but tracks that have automation that are going kind of counter. So while this goes down, tracks are going up, their automation is still intact. And notice that the gain structure to like different aux sends isn't affected because it's not summing the audio. But as I bring this down, my VCA is down, other tracks automation can still be going up in contrary motion. And as I bring the VCA up, tracks can be going down in automation just as easily. So if I wanted to actually write the automation, I can now just write the VCA fader automation. And even tracks that are going in contrary motion to the VCA fader. So let's say I go to my automation here, I could see both the original automation and the result of the VCA fader. And at this point, we could just click in here on the VCA fader itself, and we could combine the automation of the VCA and the linked channels. So this way, you could still have all of the automation, but adjust all of the automation up or down while keeping the relative automation going in contrary or in the same motion as the VCA fader. So it gets to be, if you wanted to do like, parallel processing, to have, a group channel may make more sense. If you want to take all your drums and, squash it really heavily with the compressor, the group fader can make sense. But if you wanted to, respect all of the automation is all perfect, but just bring it up and down a little bit and still have it work with the existing automation information, the VCA fader can make a little more sense for that. And the beauty is you could actually run both of them simultaneously. So you could have, if you go to the direct outputs in Cubase in the racks. So if we come here, you could have direct routing. And at this point, you could just say, okay, I want to have, direct routing to all and send it to multiple destinations. So you can send it to a fader and to a group simultaneously and kind of have the benefits of both. So once again, a group can affect the original gain structure going to the mixer, especially when dealing with aux sends. And you could also sum the audio, but it's not going to really deal with very specific automation issues, and that's what the VCA fader is designed for. So, and the beauty of Cubase is you can do both methods very effectively and pick and choose which is the appropriate course of action that you want to take, or use both of them at the same time. So if you have any more questions on VCAs, kind of play around with it a little bit, and just let me know in the comments field. All right, so I was saying a comment about dragging audio. It won't create an existing sample track. So let me just go ahead and take a look. Let's say I'll just kind of come here to my media bay and we'll look at this and we'll go ahead and just create a sampler track, and that's going to place it at the bottom. So if I just kind of drag it in to the existing sampler track, at that point, it's still the one sample track that's just being updated via the media. If I drag, if I right click here and create sampler track, it's going to create a second sampler track. But again, if I just drag it into the window here, and this also works for kind of any audio file. So if I wanted to come here, I could just drag and drop, particular audio files if you wanted to. So, and you see that even though I just selected the range, that's still all within kind of the same sample. So if you drag it into this particular window, give that a try as opposed to right clicking and creating a sampler track. I think that should help. If not, just leave a comment in the field. Just reading through different comments, there are some discussions about the setting up the talkback. So we had a question: when was the sampler track added to Cubase? It was added with version 9. So if you, and I see in the question that you have version 8. So if you upgraded to version 9.5, the current version, the sampler track would just be part of it. It was one of the big additions in Cubase 9, the addition of the sampler track. All right, so I had a question about doing crossfades within a comp. So I think I have a little project set up for comping. Okay, so let's say, we get a lot of questions about kind of, let's see if this is the right one. All right, so let's say I have just a quick bass line here. And we want to do some quick comping. So if I come here, one of the cool things you could do is to actually, if we have multiple takes, so let's say we did, 6 different takes here, and I wanted to go to take 2. I'm just going to remove the chord track from this real quick. So if you want to select different ranges here, at this point, you could just grab the comp tool. And as you do this, it will, we could see the lanes. So you want to make sure that you have show lanes. And if you don't see that, right click. And if you go to the track control settings, at this point, just make sure you could have hidden and visible functions. So you could actually just, the lane display type, you could make sure that that's in the visible section. So as we wanted to do this, we could see all of our different takes. And as we wanted to listen, and you could select different takes here if you wanted to just say, okay, I just wanted to grab this and make this longer. Now, if you wanted to, once you close this is going to make kind of your comp take. And one of the things that a lot of people miss is that you could just have the auto fade settings turned on. So you could very quickly have fade ins and fade outs for auto fades, so that between every time that there's going to be a new audio file, it will just do a slight fade in, fade out between every single edit. So just simply have the auto fade settings on, and then you could just simply, you won't hear any clicks during the transition for you. So just make sure, and you can do that for any track, but once you have all the comp parts selected, and you're like, okay, I want this note from that one, you could just close the lane view and it's automatically shown directly here. And just make sure that you have the auto fade settings on, and it will do those particular fades for you automatically and auto crossfades. And you can have that defaultly set for your project as well. All right, just going through, reading through some of the comments. All right, so seeing a question from an attendee from India. It says when you move their vocals to a new project or move their project to a new folder, that the vocals changed pitch. All right, so probably what happened, and you could probably just go directly to your pool window and make sure that, you know, you don't have, it sounds like, depending on how much it's out of pitch, if it's slightly more than like a semitone, you may want to check and just make sure that there's not a sample rate mismatch. So, you know, if you open up the pool window under media, you can now just kind of come over here, and then you could see on the info tab, you can see, okay, this is 24-bit 44.1 mono file, like so. And as we do this, you know, make sure, and if you want to see what your project is currently set to, you could just go to your project menu and go to project setup. And then at this point, you could see your sample rate indicated. My guess is when you moved perhaps the project folder that there was a sample rate mismatch. I'm just going to reread the question one more time, see if there's any more clues for me. So I really think it's going to be, from reading your question, that it's probably going to be a sample rate mismatch. So check that out. And again, you can make sure that your project set up. So once you go to here to project setup, that sample rate here matches the sample rate of the media in your pool window. So at this point, you make sure that those are the same. And if they're mismatched, you probably will just have to make sure that you rebuild the project with one consistent sample rate. All right. And I'm also saying another question from the same person, that time stretch is grayed out. So probably when you go to audio to processes, you know, you may, you know, some things may be grayed out depending upon what is currently active. So you may have to select a part for it to do for certain functions to show up. So once I have the audio selected here, we can see a lot of additional functionality just because a particular part or event is selected for that function to work on. So make sure that you have the part actually selected. So we had a question, is it possible to add more new complex chords? I think, you know, you can with the chord track, getting back to the chord track, sorry for lack of context. So, when you come here, you could do, tremendous amount of complex chords with the different voicings and tensions. So again, if you wanted to come here and say, I want it to be a C suspended for ninth with a D sharp in the bass, or a G in the bass, so you can do all sorts of, very creative tensions here. So, I've seen like really heavy duty jazz musicians that, could find all the chords that they wanted to. So I think kind of playing back with some of the different tensions available here. And again, just like if I put the MIDI input, I think I did this the last thing, I'll just randomly put my fingers down. So there we could do a C augmented seventh, sharp seventh, ninth, sharp 11th. So, you can have multiple tensions and inversions for your bass note indicated as well. So I think it'll really, there may be some, there's obviously different schools of thought with chord spelling with names, but I think between all the combinations that it can pretty much do any chord that you really want it to. So we had a question. Someone was scoring a film with Cubase element and they ran out of channels. So, sometimes, Cubase elements there is a fixed number of channels that you may not run into in the, like in Cubase Pro, or you can get more channels within Cubase Artist. But, and one of the things that to be aware, and it's, like when I was at Junkie XL's room the last time, I think, his opening template was 3,200 tracks going on. So, building a large template, if you have limited number of tracks you may have to be a little more clever with organization. So that's kind of something to be aware of. But if you have, a lot of stuff going on, you can choose to mix down the track, save it as an audio track, import that into a project. Let's say you get beyond, I think Elements is maybe, I'm probably totally wrong. This might be 64 audio channels. So you can have a lot of MIDI channels in one project, mix it down to a stereo audio file, build another project on top of that. Add 64 more channels, more MIDI, more instrument, mix that down, so there's definite ways to, get beyond some of the limitations. But, it might require some more mixing down, some more rendering in place, where you could take multiple sources and be able to render, those sources, kind of sub mix it down, just kind of what people have been doing with analog consoles. So when composers are working with 3,200 channels, things will be sub mixed down. If they were going to be going to an analog console, because there's no analog console big enough to do large projects like that. So that's why people are kind of doing computer based. So experiment with some different mix down options. I think that could help. Also, sometimes layering sounds, if you go to, let's say, if you have a Hallion open, let's just say if I have a Hallion with my VSTI, if you want a really thick sound, sometimes you could layer instruments within different instruments. So let's say if I have a Hallion 6 and I want to create a really thick string layer, I could have multiple. So let's say we'll just go to, and you could do very similar things with the Hallion Sonic SE that comes with, so if you want to come here and let's say we have, a number of different sounds, and some of these could be like an octave higher, an octave lower. So let's say we have, 8 sounds, we could actually have these all go and respond to one MIDI track. So if you're like, running into track limitations, just simply stacking all of your instruments to one MIDI track, and then you can have 7 instruments that are layered together as opposed to 7 MIDI tracks. So one MIDI track could be sending out to Hallion 6 on MIDI channel 1, and there's 7 different sounds layered. To do this within something like the Hallion Sonic SE that comes with all the Cubase versions. So let's just say we could do very similar concept. So as soon as I come here, I can say, I wanted this particular patch. I wanted that patch here. And then when we go to MIDI, we could just say we want these all to be layered on MIDI channel 1. I wanted this one to be transposed up an octave. I wanted this one to be transposed down an octave to make it thicker. Or I only wanted these keys to be, at this point, I only want those keys, this to be in those particular note ranges as well. So there's a lot of things you could do to kind of really, limit your number of tracks and still have big, huge sounds. Okay, so just reading through a couple of questions. So it's a question, why don't I do more Hallion 6? Really all you have to do is just ask more Hallion 6 questions. So what, if we have Wavelab questions, Dorico questions, Hallion questions, Groove Agent questions, just feel free to ask. But there will be some more Hallion 6 Q&A videos coming that I'm working on as we speak. Okay, so we had a question about assigning like a track to like a different controller, like a lemur, something like that. I think it was with the lemur controller. So a lot of this can be done, a lot of controllers. So once you go to your studio menu or VST, your devices menu in earlier versions, we go to your studio setup or your device setup, and you could have different MIDI devices. So a lot of controllers will work with something like a Mackie control. And once you have a Mackie control defined, you could have your MIDI connections of where your device is going in. Then you could just have your faders show up here. If that's not kind of doing what you expected, you could also just do a generic MIDI remote. So if you wanted to come directly here, you could go to your generic remote and you could say this fader, and you could actually learn this. So with your lemur, I know, many composers will use it. You want to set up, let's say, your input and output port, that your lemur is communicating on, probably over Wi-Fi. And you could say that fader 1 here. And, if you don't know what MIDI message it's spitting out, at this point, you could just say, I want it, this is, click on learn, move the lemur. It's going to learn the MIDI message. And then at this point, you can say, I want fader 1 in the VST mixer to control, audio channel 10, and I want it to be volume. So it'll default to volume for the most part, but you could also say, you know, I want controller 16, let's say general purpose controller here to control, let's say on audio 10, I wanted to control, you know, let's say I had an insert on this particular channel. So if I come here and I wanted to control my delay time, so I could come here, let's just do a quick mono delay. Okay, so at this point, you could say when you go to your generic remote, this MIDI controller, let's say fader 2, I wanted to control audio 10. And then instead of my action, I wanted to control the insert mono delay for, you know, you could just come directly here and say your delay time. And now whatever incoming MIDI message is going to be kind of spitting out and controlling this. And you could save these as kind of presets as well. So you could set it up through generic remote if it doesn't work with like Mackie control. A lot of people, you know, just set up with a generic remote and you can have your fader on your iPad controlling all of your Cubase faders just like that. So we had a question about rendering in place with when there's multiple outputs active. So if you're not familiar with the issue, we'll just create the issue here. So I'll just do a new empty project. Sorry about that. All right, so let's say I have a lovely 21st century composition here is being routed up. All right, and within Hallion, I have multiple outputs. Let's say I have 3 outputs, but I only have this one particular channel. So when I go to render in place, and let's say I do our complete channel settings, we now hit render, and I think we'll get to, so at that point, it just rendered that. And I think it used to, let me just check my render settings one more time. And I'll just make sure I have the outputs. So I have 3 outputs here. And when I go to render in place, let me just, that seems to be working as expected. Let me just try it again. So right now, if I just did it dry, if I did it with the it created two different tracks. But if I had that selected and went to my render and play settings here, and I chose the complete signal path, let's see if I choose complete signal path, what it does now. It's going to work like that. But if I don't have the complete signal path, at that point, it will make empty channel. So I know it's not ideal. You know, you may want to have a little more flexibility with, you know, the choice of including effects. But if we come here to the complete signal path here, it looks like it's only doing the output that's on that particular channel. So just, you could try that. So you're saying a question about tutorials in Spanish. I know we have a lot of, native Spanish speakers in our office. So I will see if I could send them all of my files to see if we could get like Spanish versions. But I think all the tutorials, like all the Q&A tutorials that I've done, that you could actually watch them subtitled in Spanish. So that might be a good workaround. I know it's not ideal, and I'm sorry that wasn't better at Spanish in high school. But I'm happy to kind of pass on project files to others to see if they could translate them. But I believe that a lot of the Q&A stuff you could watch it closed captioned in Spanish. But I haven't tried. All right, so we had someone who wanted to explain loop mash. So let's take a look at it. So loop mash is kind of an interesting beast. So what loop mash allows you to do as an instrument is to actually take different sources. And what a lot of people miss is the fact that you can have different combinations of audio files. And basically, as we play, we could choose like one file to kind of be like the master file. So, and then we could bring in different elements of other tracks. So where you click here, this could be kind of the master file, and we could bring in kind of different elements, and you could play with kind of number of voices per track. So now all these different tracks can actually go and be based on kind of the timing and groove, but replace different elements of loop mash. So if I wanted this track to be the master, I could bring in fewer sources of this and more elements of this particular track. And you could save these as different scenes on different pads that you could trigger in real time. So you could kind of take basically mashing two different loops together. And there's all sorts of great loops and presets that comes with this. Now, where it could get like super interesting. So say we start here. Is that you can have kind of an entire performance controls. So if you want to, do like stutters, Sorry, it'll just. So, but what's the coolest thing to me about loop mash is, one, you can kind of take different loops and mash them together, come up with like really interesting creative things and play it in real time. But when you get into doing like, some of the different, you could run the loop mash effects as its own plugin. So if I wanted to come here, let's say I had this going on. Sorry about that. All right. All right, let me just try a different file. Sorry about that. That's pretty hideous. Sounded great in my headphones. Let's try this project here. All right. So I just have this loop mash FX on my stereo bus here. It's a project by Sal Pelaez. Great remix artist. Great programmer. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of come over here and run this as a plugin. And I could actually just play this in real time via Midi. Or if I wanted to. So you want to do like kind of scratches or drops. So you can set kind of your rhythmic value. So I'll just come over here. Or if you wanted to do like almost like a little. Or even repeat a phrase. And if I wanted to just add a MIDI track, I could just come directly here, set its output to loop mash. So once it's been activated, and if I wanted to just kind of come here. So from MIDI, you could just trigger. And you could just sequence it or automate the plugin to do kind of whatever you wanted to. So it's an incredibly powerful tool for doing remixes and DJ type of functionality with audio in real time that you could actually play musically and be able to, quantize your events and be very musical with it. So again, it runs its own VST instrument or directly as a plugin. And again, you can play both of them and switch your different scenes through MIDI. So we have a question about, someone that runs Cubasis on iPad and then taking the projects back to, or migrating the project to Cubase and wanting to know if there's a way to kind of go from Cubase to Cubasis. I don't think there's a way to go back, because it's kind of different file functionality and, or different functionality within the project. But maybe as the iPads get a little more advanced processor wise, it could be approachable. But I know some people just, take MIDI files and stuff like that and transfer over, or make, equal length audio file stem to kind of go back if needed. But, for most practical uses, people would start in Cubasis and then, take the project to Cubase and kind of finish it off with more processing power and plugins and capabilities. So, so question, are there any tips for using the Vienna Ensemble with Cubase Pro 9.5? I don't have a copy of Vienna Ensemble. I know it's very popular with composers, but I'm probably not the best person to ask. I've never actually run it. So I wish I could give some more insights. Maybe some other people would be able to help. I know it's a very common workflow method for a lot of our composers. All right, good to see Mike Smith on a Hangout. I enjoy all of his videos he does as well. So very sharp guy, and his cool synths and wood and synths. So he makes all the cool frames. Cool stuff you should check out. All right, so we have a question. What's the best way to trim, pitch, and effect an audio sample while preserving the best quality? So I know, like, some people, when doing sound design work, like to work at the highest sample rate possible. So those are the guys that are working at 192K, so they have more information when they start doing time stretching and like extreme time stretching, that the more data present, that they kind of get higher results. So some people will do a lot of stuff with so people are doing kind of extreme, for like records and typical recordings, you don't have to do anything special. Like the stretching sounds really good, way beyond what it should sound good at. But if you're doing like very particular, like where you're dropping something like, 4 octaves in pitch, for different sound design, that's when people often work with higher sample rates to have more data to work with. So a lot of my friends that do sound design for computer games, like a good friend of mine who works at Bungie, he's a huge advocate of doing everything, and also one of my friends at Bungie and one of my friends at I'm trying to remember the big Blizzard, at Blizzard Games. They're big advocates of everything at 192, so they could just mangle sounds and have a lot more data to work with that gives them better results. So, but for most musical applications, if you're not making really odd, scary monster storm sounds and explosions for a living, you don't really have to do anything special. The algorithms sound really good as they are. All right, so I had a question: how to have a tempo track and like a tempo calculator. So let's say, there's, if you wanted to have a tempo track, Yeah, and there's a lot of different tempo calculations that you could do. But one of the things is, you could just come here and add a tempo track directly from the song. So just right click, add tempo track. And if you have it following a particular tempo, you could just kind of come here and adjust the tempo as you see fit. So if you wanted to draw in tempo changes, you could do that, and you could have, the project speed up and slow down to match accordingly. Now, where a lot of people, like when working with video, one of the things that can really help a lot of composers is they want to have a particular tempo for like a video cue. So, and this is where one of the tools that comes in, some people used to use very kind of really esoteric, pulling out calculators and crazy stuff to make tempos fit the video. So I'm just going to import, I think I have a video file here that we could take a look at. I'll just do an empty. See if this is. All right, so let's say may have just a frame mismatch here. So if you have a video frame mismatch, one of the things you could do is if you get to your project setup, this point we could actually get the frame rate from the video. So let's say we could hit F8 and open up the video window. And if you wanted to set particular tempos from, let's say, different scenes in the video. So let's say right here where these guys are asleep in a car, you wanted that to be, let's say, your downbeat. What you could do is grab the time warp tool and just move like measure 65 directly to, so if we zoom in, and you could actually just kind of go, I think you go like 2 seconds here in a video. So you can say, I want measure 64 to be right at that particular time. And let's say we play just a little bit. And while those guys are sleeping, I want it to be, an even number of bars, say from 64. And I need this measure 68 to be right here. What I could do now is just move measure 68. And at that point, you could see that it's going to calculate the number of bars for your tempo here. So you can say, okay, this video cue starts right here. I need that particular time. Let's say right where it goes to the car. And you could also just switch to your time code as your master time code source here. You could have different nudging palettes. So we could actually nudge by, 1 frame if we wanted to. So as soon as I come here, we can say this is where measure 65 starts. And at that point, we could just have it automatically calculate the different timing between different points. So if you want measure 68 to be right here at this particular video position, and right here is where you want measure 67. With the time warp tool, you could move each one of the measures directly to the position in the video that you wanted to. So you could just say, and just simply move the cursor, and you could just kind of nudge frame by frame in the video like so. And right where his hand comes up, I want measure 67, and it will just automatically calculate all the different tempo changes automatically for you. So it makes it really easy for spotting tempos to video. All right, so we got confirmation from Nick later that the preference fixed his long load times for his preferences. So I bet he's glad he watched the Hangout today. Glad that worked out for you. All right, so just reading a question about UAD. All right, so I think the question is kind of dealing with how to deal with like perhaps latency on input when tracking. So I don't have the Apollo interfaces. I use the Steinberg ones, and we have kind of the built-in processing for dynamics and guitar amps and reverbs without any delay. So what a lot of people like, and I currently have a UR44, so I'll just do a quick new project here. I'll close the video window, and let's say on my audio connections or VST connections, I wanted to have my inputs, and let's say I have my inputs routed to my UR44 here. And now when I go to my mix console, we'll go to our full mix console. I can see my inputs here, my stereo in. We get kind of a hardware setting. So let's go. If I go to my racks, we'll activate our hardware. And with the new, for instance, the UR44, UR242, UR44, UR824, and also the brand new URRTs, which are great, that actually have Rupert Neve transformers. On the input stage, we could come here and have our various plugins. So if I wanted to have the channel strip and also like the reverb, we can monitor that. Now, depending upon the plugin, some plugins you can actually print with zero latency. So if you didn't have this special hardware, you can just kind of run inserts. For instance, a gem of a plugin, like if you want to do compression, is going to be the actual Portico, like the Rupert Neve Designs Portico, because let's see if we could actually come in here, and if we go into our plugin managers, and some of the plugins will have a lot more latency. So let's say if I wanted to come here and we have our 5043, let me just. So, and we look at this, I think if we go to information, what's great about the 5043 is it has no latency. So a lot of times when you go to different plugins, the plugins themselves can have a lot of latency. So let's say if we go to, so there's, depending upon the plugins, some of the plugins process with higher latencies. So I know a lot of people that will print with plugins on inserts. It could be a bit off-putting for the musician sometimes if they're recording, because sometimes the plugins can cause latency. So I haven't worked with UAD stuff. I had the older ones, and I never got them updated. So I haven't seen what they do for latency on the newer interfaces. But you could just simply print with the input. Now, if you're recording with the plugins on input, you have to make sure that when you go to your studio setup and you go to your audio interface, the UR44s can do that with direct monitoring turned on. I don't think that the can monitor with the built-in hardware DSP. I'm not sure if the other interfaces work that way. So if you're not hearing it, make sure to check your actual direct monitoring settings. You may have to toggle that. But, some of the plugins will have more latency depending upon the plugin than others. Some of the plugins will be designed specifically for live use, for tracking. So you could just simply have that as your insert. So I hope that answered the question. If not, just feel free to let me know in the comments. Okay, so we had a question about making a macro to kind of cut between like different kick tracks. So let me just go ahead and activate this. So I think what someone wants to do is maybe just cut based on the, I'll just revert this real quick. Okay, just to kind of cut. So one of the things that a lot of people miss is just kind of coming here, and you could probably do this in the macro as well, but if you come here and if you go to advanced, is just do a detect silence. So we go ahead and kind of zoom in just a little bit here, and you could kind of set your threshold. And then you could kind of play with the minimum times here, close, and then if what you could do is just kind of come over here, and this is just super quick and dirty. So if I say process, what you could do is you could have it kind of automatically split. Let me just see if I can do it maybe more on the snare here. But let's just try to select this and just try to detect silence. So kind of adjust, play with the thresholds here. And then basically what you could do is break apart each one, select them all, and just do like a little fade in, fade out. So that's one easy way of doing it without necessarily having to do a macro. You can kind of just slice. You could also, from the sample editor, probably do it as well. So say you want to go to your hit points, set your threshold, and then create slices. And then you could just do, crossfades between it as well. All right, so we had a question about names of two different, let's say if we had a long name, and this may be different for Mac or PC. So let me just see if we give it a ridiculous name. We can see how that is kind of goes to two different rows. I've heard that it doesn't behave the same way on PC. I don't have my PC version of Cubase open. but the Mac version seems to just go change the size of the font. So, but that seems to be working on my Mac, but not sure. I've gotten comments before that's perhaps different on PC, so you may want to check that. All right, so we had a question. If you're using the control room, do you need to have the left-right output assigned as well? What I do is, first I just open the wrong window. So what I do is I have my control room, like my first set of monitors connected here. I have the output set up and I have it selected as not connected. Otherwise, the signal within the control room can be double bust. So it could go out of the outputs in the control room. And I get this question where people are like, yeah, I adjust the control room volume here and I still hear it. And the signal is just being double bust. So go, if you have the control room set up, define your outputs, but leave them as not connected and define the physical connections in your monitors here. Then it should probably make a little more sense. So there's a question about becoming a Steinberg certified trainer. I think, you could apply on the website for that. So if you're interested, I think you can just kind of apply in a website. And I think it's up to each different country and each distributor of how they choose. So, but that's something that you could investigate through the website. Right, just reading through different comments and questions. Thanks everyone for wonderful questions. Hope everyone's learning a trick or two. Okay, so I had a question about setting hit points automatically at the beginning of a bar, and it's and you want to divide it by time and BPM. Well, depending on the material, let's say you have your snare track here. Your snare may not show up on the downbeat that you'd want. So what I would do is, if you're trying to figure out like the tempo, one is just to use the tempo detection. I think works great, but you could also just select a range like this. So let's say, okay, this is 1 bar. And at that point, just kind of an old school way of doing it is to, I think it's maybe in Project, I've done this in years, go to the beat calculator. And you could type in the number of beats and it'll automatically calculate the tempo for you based upon the range selection. So instead of having necessarily, if an event doesn't occur on beat 1, like our snare here, we could select that range, go to our project to the beat calculator and type in a number of bars, and it will set the tempo, and you could automatically insert that in the tempo line. So we have a question: will Cubase 10 only support VST3 plugins? I haven't heard that. There's confusion, obviously, because Steinberg came out and they've just discontinued support for VST2 plugins, which they've supported concurrently with VST3 probably for 10, 11 years now. So they're not going to be supporting VST2 plugins development, but I haven't heard of any plans of not being able to run the plugins in Cubase. So just because they're not going to be doing the software development kit for VST2 plugins doesn't mean that VST2 plugins won't run in Cubase. So I haven't heard of any plans at all to discontinue support or compatibility with VST2 plugins, but just, it's kind of like 64-bit where it's like, okay, there's a new standard for 11 years, time to get with a new standard for better functionality and better operability. I see a comment, call me the real owner of Steinberg. I think that's Yamaha, but I'm lucky that they, allow me to work for them. So I'm very fortunate. All right, so I had a question about the render track getting the name from the audio. So let me go ahead and we'll just load up a quick instrument here. So let's take a look at some different rendering options for names. All right, so we have this, and we go to render in place. Let's get to our render settings. And if you click here, you could go to the naming conventions. So let me just see. So let's see what happens if we just give it a name, like we'll have that carry over for the part name. So I just held down the command key and we named that. And let's see what the rendered file will be called. So we'll go to our render settings and we'll see what the file will be called. So we have name is untitled here, locked. We'll render it. So it looks like it just carries over the track name for the name of the audio file. Okay, so I think that does what you want, Rick. Just rereading your question. So let me know if not. So we had a question: the easiest way to come up with like hit points for a file as a file is recorded or generated. The hit points are calculated automatically for you. So as you're recording the file, as a file is rendered, processed, imported, the hit points will automatically be calculated. And if you wanted to, adjust the hit points, you can kind of, just kind of come here. I think if we, I think if you click on different modifier keys. And see if I get my correct modifier key. But if you wanted to insert, different hit points and move them around, I'm just blanking on the key combination. Just there is a keyboard shortcut to kind of take a modifier key to get rid of. Let me see if I just grab the draw tool. So if I come here, I think if I hold down, just trying to remember, just blanking on the modifier key, but there is a modifier key to manually add or remove the hit points. All right, so we had a question about external effects processors, and we just had a video go up on this recently on a Q&A series on the Cubase channel. But if you wanted to go to the audio connections here, and I see Nick said he get it working as a send, but not an insert. So if we come here, let's say I have a lexicon, you define the inputs and outputs of where it's being connected to. So let's say I have it here and here and then let's say I have it in. So once I have that done, this effect can now be kind of used anywhere. So as soon as I go to, I could run it as an insert. So it'll be under external plugins. And it could be that once you come here to like, if you have it being used as a send, if you have it being used already, you may not be able to see it. So if I go to my inserts here, we'll cancel this and go to inserts. At this point, I won't have it defined as an insert, but now if I go to my sends, and let's choose to right click and add a send, that we should see our external plugin to the lexicon. So you can kind of use one instance of it. So, just kind of because it is hardware, it's kind of the nature of the beast. And once you've done the external effects, just make sure to click here, and that will actually kind of ping the system and determine the latency and automatically compensate for it. So it could be that maybe you have it used as a send and you can't have it used as a send and an insert at the same time. So you kind of have one or the other. All right, so we had a couple questions that were sent in earlier. Just make sure we get to these. One was how to quickly audition like different projects in how to quickly kind of audition different like drum sounds. So let me just see if I have a particular project that I had started here. So let me just. I'll just build a quick one. All right, so someone wanted to be able to quickly audition different drum sounds in Groove Agent SE. So one of the things you can do in Groove Agent SE that's pretty cool is if you just go to kind of your file browser here. I think if I have a folder called samples, and let's say I just wanted to throw in just a kick drum to start off with here on C1. All right, so I want to build a quick MIDI track. And let's say I'll do the annoying bass drum pattern here. So I'll just, and let's just look at it in a drum editor. And we'll go C1. We'll set this to quarter note. And I'll just grab my drumstick and, all right. So we'll take this and loop it. So let's say now at this point, we wanted to audition different drum samples. So some people were thinking you had to just sit here and drag each file over to a pad, but you could also just come right here and click on replace sample. And here you could just hit the arrow keys and audition different kick drums. And once you find one you like, just hit enter and that will be loaded up. So a very easy way. So just kind of go right here in the instrument to main and just simply click on replace sample, find it on your hard drive. And then if you accidentally hit the wrong thing, then you could just simply audition it while it plays continuously, just like this. So again, replace sample. Find a sample you like, and life is good. All right, we had a question about that I just wanted to show, came up after Club Cubase in Nashville recently, where the actual piano pedal indications were showing up between the stabs, and looking for a way to change that so that they would go underneath the staff. So we'll show you just a quick little trick with this. Just find. Here we go. All right, so let's say if we come here. Now, one of the settings that a lot of people find annoying is, let's see if we can find it real quick. So if we go to notation style, one of the things that often kind of shows up is pedal markers could be on by default. And we see that when you do like a grand staff, that often what happens is sometimes the pedals can go in between the staves, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you wanted to change this, you could just hold down the shift key and that will select all of the different piano sustain. And if you want to adjust, just you can move these down with the object selection tool. And if you hold down Control or Command, you could actually, since I moved it down first, we could lock its position and just simply have the pedal indications below the different lines like so. So if you run into that situation, again, just shift and double click on one of the pedals while you hold, like double click on the first pedal, hold it down, and just feel free to move it as you see fit, like so. All right, one question we had sent in is, let's say we had a project and someone noticed on a YouTube video, excuse me, that when they wanted these tracks, this area of the tracks, to kind of convey the colors that were highlighted on the track itself. And if they're looking and wondering for how to do that, and they couldn't figure out how to do it because this always stayed regardless of colorizing the track or not. So the trick is when you go to your preferences, we can now come directly here and we go to event display and tracks. You could colorize the track control area. So event display to tracks. And now you could colorize these track areas. So when you hit apply, that the colors that we set for the tracks can be actually part of the events. And if you wanted kind of different levels of intensity for the colors at this point, again, we go to the preferences. And as I just come here, I'll just hit apply, and you can see that it'll become a little more demure, little, so you have different shading on it as well. So off or fully on. So another coloring option that someone saw on YouTube and couldn't figure out how to do. So now you know. All right. We also had a question about the UR44. So the UR44, as we mentioned, when we go into the mix console, and we have these input channels. So let's say if I just want to see my input channels here, and when we go to our racks, we have once our input channels are activated and routed from the UR44. So let's say we go to my inputs here, that we have these plugins, and these really, while they may not be like the best user interface for a plugin, like, aesthetically, they do sound remarkably good. So we're going to have kind of the same configuration here. So if I wanted to look at my Rev X reverb control or my morphing channel strip, and again, I could just kind of come here. We could see like our morphing channel strip. And as we do this, you could morph. Now, if you have those interfaces, you actually will get, I believe it's a sheet of paper with the license code. This may have changed since I got my UR44. And that will have a license so that these plugins can also be used during the mix down process. I sent it to, a friend of ours, an engineer, did a favor for us, and as a send, and as a little gift to him, we gave him one of the reverbs, and he was just like so blown away by like the Rev X reverb. So this is kind of the reverb you get on the large Yamaha consoles, and this is, again, not a batteries, throw it away kind of reverb. This is a real heavy duty reverb. So if you don't see the sheet with your UR44 with the license code, probably once it's been registered, it may show up in your My Steinberg account. And then once the hardware has been registered with the serial number, look, you may have the access code there for that. And that way you could run those same processors on the input channels with 0 latency, or run it as plugins within your computer system as well. All right. We had someone that had wanted to take like a MIDI part and be able to take their existing MIDI part and be able to work with a little more intelligently with kind of their automation data from MIDI continuous controller. So one of the questions we often get is how to take the MIDI controllers and let's say we have something like this where, we have a MIDI part here. And let's say if I just wanted to have some controllers, so I'll just click here and let's say pretended I will go composer like, and let's say I have modulation going on and I wanted to, and we'll just make this a little taller. And I wanted to add, let's say, expression. So at this point, so if I had this different controller data all within this one part, and I wanted to do like my curves automation that we see, one of the things that you could do now is just, if you get to the MIDI menu under functions, is just come over here. Sorry, I made that disappear. And you could say extract MIDI automation. And once that's been done, we see kind of this little ghost outline. But now if we open up our automation panel by hitting F6, we can say show used automation. And now we could see our automation that's been laid out for us. So if I wanted to now draw in different curves, I can now just treat my MIDI CC data as automation. And where this also comes in handy is, let's say I wanted to duplicate this track. And I had like multiple C. So let's say I had different CC automation data here. So, and I wanted to copy this modulation directly to this. So what you could do is actually just kind of select the range. And if you hit the L button, that'll move the cursor to the beginning of the selected range. Then you could just hit like Control or Command C for copy, come down here and paste the automation. So if you want to do that across multiple tracks, and then also once this has been done, you could choose to scale your velocity, tilt it, or your different controllers. So, and again, and one of the cool things is if you wanted to write your controllers as MIDI controllers, or if you wanted to switch it to be all based on automation, at this point, if you go to the MIDI CC automation setup, you could choose to have the destination actually go directly to an automation track. And if it goes to the automation track, at that point, it would just show up directly as automation, or you could have it go to the MIDI part, and there's different conflict resolutions of how it'll merge or modulate or average between those two. So, and some people may go, okay, I wanted to just draw in pitch bend, like if you're doing EDM type music and you wanted to just say, okay, just really wanted to draw in, a pitch bend with this curve, but you don't see pitch bend data for this particular Hallion preset. So if you just come here to the automation data and click on more, at this point, you could just choose your Hallion 1 organ, say your MIDI controllers, port A, channel 1, and then you'll see your pitch bend as a choice there. And now you could just freely draw in different pitch bends. We'll just activate the right. And now you could just draw in your various curves for pitch bends like so. So if you wanted to treat your CC data as automation or vice versa, you have the choice. All right. We also had a quick question about doing fills with Groove Agent. One of the cool things, if you're using one of the preset patterns in Groove Agent. So I'll just go here to my VST instrument. a lot of the kits that come with Groove Agent, you know, you have different patterns. So if I start off a pattern here, and we'll say follow transport, now Groove Agent will play. And we see that we have like different drum fills for each of these patterns. Let's say I'll just slow it down to something a little more reasonable. So let's say I have this as my groove. Now what's cool about Groove Agent is you could set it as your MIDI input here. So I could have intros. So I'm just going to place this into record, and let's say we start off. And I want to have different functions here. And let me just take out a loop. Sorry about that. All right, so place into record. So it's actually recording all my data in real time. And with each of these patterns, you have different drum fills, endings, beginnings. And each of the yellow patterns here can have, you know, multiple levels of complexity. So if you move it more to the right, different dynamic levels as well. And all that's now been recorded. So if you use kind of the preset patterns, you can have built-in drum fills. And this gets really interesting also, like just last week, one of the new kits that was released is, you know, from the great, you know, you could come over here and there's, you know, different Simon Phillips. I don't think I may not have installed it on this computer, but Simon Phillips just released a new jazz drum library where he's playing all of the, you know, different brushes and different jazz styles. So that's a great library to investigate as well. All right, so we have a question. I have an MR816. You need more inputs. Any advice on what to buy? Should I get a used 816? So if you have an MR816, you could, I like to have 16 of the same mic pre's. So if you could find a used MR816 or, you know, could be some still floating around at some dealers, I would get that, and because you can chain 3 of them together, but you could also have it connected as a mic pre. Basically, you know, you can say take the mic output, mic inputs, and send the outputs directly to out of the ADAT of one interface directly into the ADAT input. So you could have 16 of the same mic pre's. So that's a great choice. But there's a number of different 8-channel mic pre's with ADAT outputs. Audience makes one that's really great. So there's a number of different options available. But sometimes having the 16 consistent, great sounding mic pre's is hard to beat. So we have a question. Is it possible to configure the Avid Artist with Cubase elements? I think it would work. I haven't tried, but you know what? Once you have the license code for the Avid Elements for the Avid Artist mix, you should be able to see it here for the Yukon interface. I know it definitely works with the bigger ones. I believe it would work with Cubase Elements, but I'm not 100% positive. I don't have it installed on this computer, but try once you have it installed, and you may have to register it online. When you get to your device setup or your studio setup, click on a plus, and then you should see the Yukon set up here. I don't have it installed. And then you should be, so if you see the Yukon in there, then you should be all set. All right, we had a question. What is the generic key command to bring up the editor of a plugin? So I think there's do a search. I forgot what it is. think it's maybe going to be under, let's see, look and edit first here. I forget what the keyboard shortcut is, but if you want to email me at clubcubase at steinberg.net, I could look it up for you. Sorry about that. Let me just see. And it could be different for like plugins. Let me just see. Okay, so under edit instrument. Yeah, I'll find it if you want to email me. Apologize for that. Okay, I got a question from Mac about the solo in place for external instruments. So I actually, unhooked the external instrument from my device, and it seemed like the solo defeat was working for me. So Mac, if you want to email me just like perhaps a project file that I could take a look at, I could try to mimic it on my end. But when I tested it, it actually the solo defeat seemed to be working on my end. But if you want to send me a project file, that would be great. And again, you could send that to clubcubase at steinberg.net. All right, so we have a question about the elastic, about Very Audio using, the Elastic algorithm. The solo algorithm is from Elastic. So while I may not say Elastic, it is, developed by Elastic. So I know a lot of people get kind of hung up on the naming conventions of that, but that's the optimum algorithm for working with vocals. So that's why it's kind of predetermined with that. And we had a question about, showing how to use the, if we have the loop mash FX, as an insert. So as soon as, again, we find it under other, so we see our loop mash FX. And now as soon as that's been added, we could add a MIDI track and set the MIDI output here to loop mash FX. And then you could just trigger away from your MIDI device. I'm seeing a question that UR44 has different input gain on channel 2. Make sure that you don't have it set for high impedance. One of the inputs, can be set for the correct impedance for the output from an electric bass or electric guitar. So make sure that you don't have the impedance switch to high Z, and that'll probably take care of it for you. So we had a question about the indices or the index of the Hangouts. So generally what people do is as they watch, people will add it as a comment afterward in one of the comments of the Hangout, because it just shows up on a YouTube page that could be watched afterward. So if you just kind of leave it in the comments, that would be wonderful for people to do. It's always so helpful, and it's hard for me to go back and, change and rewatch it again. So I appreciate everyone that does that. So I see Nick mentioning that doing the running your API as a mono in, mono out, and coming back as one side. So it would. I think it would make sense that it would come back as mono. So if you're using a mono processor, it would probably only be working on one channel as opposed to like a stereo channel. So try it on a mono source like your voice or a bass or something like that, and see if it kind of works as expected. All right, so I see a comment from Leonardo about effects chain presets. If you wanted to send me a couple or send me a project where it's not loading up, I could look into it for you. So you can, again, email me at clubcubase@steinberg.net. But I'll go ahead and give it a quick try here. So let's say, then we'll have to be wrapping up. All right, so okay, so we'll call it May 29. Now let's do a new project. So that seemed to work for me, but if you have a particular chain that you want me to try, just let me know, Leonardo, and then I'll be happy to take a look at it. But it seems to be kind of working as expected here. So we have a question: is there a way to get advanced notification of the Hangouts? If you always kind of mention it as a Facebook event, and if you subscribe to the channel, you often will get a notice that there's a Hangout going to happen. So those are the two best ways. But kind of, if you follow, Steinberg on Facebook, they always will announce it there. But definitely subscribe to the channel. Well, I have to get going to pick up my son from school. I hope that everyone has learned a couple tips or tricks today. Thanks everyone for the wonderful questions. If you've liked the session, please feel free to like the video and again, subscribe to the channel. You get notified of future Hangouts. If you have particular questions that you want to be covered in a Hangout, please feel free to email them at clubcubase@steinberg.net. Again, thanks everyone for the wonderful questions, and we'll go ahead and wrap up. We hope that again everyone's learned a couple tips or tricks. And thank you so much. And we'll go ahead and wrap up. We'll just take one last quick look, see if there's any burning things before we end. If not, we'll see you in June. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and end the Hangout. And thank you so much. And we'll see you next time.